The morning air in Washington, D.C. carried an unusual tension as Barack Obama sat in his private study, staring at the golden medal that had defined a pivotal moment in his presidency. The Nobel Peace Prize awarded to him in October 2009 gleamed under the soft lamplight. For 15 years it had remained a symbol of hope and global recognition, but today it felt different in his hands. Obama had been wrestling with this decision for months. The weight of recent global events had pressed heavily on his conscience. The conflicts that had escalated worldwide, the humanitarian crises that seemed to multiply despite international efforts, and most significantly, the revelations about certain military operations during his presidency that had only recently come to light through declassified documents. Michelle entered the room quietly, noticing her husband's contemplative mood. She had seen this expression before during the most difficult decisions of his presidency. Without words, she understood the internal struggle he was facing. The man who had once inspired millions with his message of hope and change was now questioning whether he had truly lived up to the ideals that the Nobel Committee had recognized. The decision crystallized when Obama received a letter from a young Afghan girl whose family had been affected by a drone strike during his administration. Her words were simple yet powerful, asking not for revenge or anger but for honesty and accountability. That letter now sat beside the Nobel Prize, both objects representing different aspects of his legacy. Obama reached for his phone and dialed his longtime advisor. The conversation would set in motion a series of events that would shock the world and challenge the very foundations of international diplomacy and recognition. The news broke on a quiet Tuesday morning through a carefully worded statement released simultaneously to major news outlets worldwide. The headline seemed impossible to believe. Former President Barack Obama announces return of 2009 Nobel Peace Prize. Within minutes, the story dominated every news cycle across the globe. The statement was profound in its simplicity and devastating in its honesty. Obama explained that while he had been deeply honored to receive the prize, recent reflections on his presidency had led him to conclude that his actions, particularly in military interventions and drone operations, were inconsistent with the principles the award represented. The Norwegian Nobel Committee found themselves in unprecedented territory. Never in the 120-year history of the prize had a recipient voluntarily returned their award. Committee members held emergency meetings, frantically consulting historical precedents and legal frameworks. The global media descended upon Oslo like a storm, with reporters camping outside the Nobel Institute seeking answers to questions no one had anticipated. Social media erupted with reactions spanning the entire emotional spectrum. Supporters praised Obama's integrity and moral courage, calling it the ultimate act of presidential accountability. Critics questioned his motives, suggesting political calculation rather than genuine remorse. World leaders scrambled to respond, with some expressing shock and others defending Obama's record. In Chicago, where Obama had built his political career, citizens gathered in Grant Park where he had once delivered his victory speech. The atmosphere was somber yet respectful, as people tried to process what this unprecedented action meant for American leadership and global politics. The ripple effects extended beyond politics into academic circles, with ethicists and international law experts debating the implications. Universities scheduled emergency seminars and think tanks published rapid response analyses trying to contextualize this extraordinary moment in modern history. The international community's response revealed the complex web of diplomatic relationships and moral expectations that govern global politics. European leaders, many of whom had worked closely with Obama during his presidency, found themselves in delicate positions. German Chancellor's office issued a measured statement acknowledging Obama's courage and self-reflection, while avoiding any judgment on his presidential actions. The reaction from conflict zones where Obama's policies had direct impact was particularly poignant. In Afghanistan, where American military presence had continued throughout his presidency, local leaders offered mixed responses. Some viewed the gesture as meaningful acknowledgement of civilian casualties, while others saw it as insufficient. Without concrete reparations or policy changes, former military officials who had served under Obama faced difficult questions from reporters. Some defended their former commander-in-chief's decisions as necessary in complex wartime situations, while others admitted privately that they had harbored doubts about certain operations. The military community, traditionally protective of their leaders, found themselves publicly grappling with questions of moral responsibility in modern warfare. Nobel laureates from around the world weighed in on the unprecedented situation. Malala Yousafzai, the young Pakistani activist, praised Obama's honesty, while emphasizing that true peace requires continuous commitment to nonviolent solutions. The Dalai Lama, with his characteristic wisdom, suggested that Obama's action demonstrated the kind of self-awareness that could lead to genuine progress toward peace. Academic institutions began organizing symposiums to examine the broader implications. Harvard Law School, where Obama had once served as president of the Law Review, announced a special conference on moral leadership and accountability in the modern presidency. The discussions promised to reshape how future leaders might approach the balance between national security and humanitarian concerns. Behind the scenes, Obama's inner circle had been divided on this decision for weeks. Some longtime advisors argued that returning the prize would overshadow the positive achievements of his presidency and provide ammunition to political opponents. Others, particularly those who had been troubled by certain policy decisions, supported what they saw as a necessary reckoning with the complexities of presidential power. The former president's daily routine had been disrupted by the global attention. Security details were increased as crowds gathered outside his Washington office and Chicago home. Some supporters came to show solidarity, while protesters demanded he address specific military actions from his presidency. The peaceful nature of most gatherings reflected the thoughtful tone Obama had set with his statement. International peace organizations found themselves in the unusual position of praising a decision that essentially criticized their own previous endorsements. The International Committee of the Red Cross issued a statement supporting Obama's moral courage, while using the moment to call for greater accountability in all military operations worldwide. Religious leaders across different faiths saw the gesture as embodying principles central to their teachings about humility and moral responsibility. The Vatican issued a rare statement from the Pope, noting that true leadership sometimes requires acknowledging our fallibility. Buddhist monks in Myanmar, themselves dealing with conflicts involving their own country, organized prayer sessions for world peace inspired by Obama's example. The legal community debated whether Obama's action created any precedent for accountability beyond traditional political processes. Some suggested it represented a form of moral leadership that transcended legal requirements, while others worried it might set unrealistic standards for future leaders facing similar complex decisions. The psychological impact of Obama's decision resonated deeply with military families who had served during his presidency. Many found themselves re-examining their own experiences and the meaning of their service. Veterans organizations issued carefully worded statements acknowledging the complexity of military service while appreciating Obama's recognition of civilian casualties in conflict zones. International relations experts began analyzing how this unprecedented action might affect American diplomatic standing. Some argued it demonstrated a level of moral leadership that could actually enhance America's global reputation, while others worried it might be perceived as weakness by adversaries. The debate highlighted fundamental questions about how nations should address the moral complexities of international intervention. The Nobel Committee faced pressure to establish clearer guidelines for future awards, particularly regarding recipients who later questioned their own worthiness. Committee members privately acknowledged that Obama's action had forced them to confront the challenge of evaluating leaders whose full legacy might only become clear years after recognition. In academic circles, the gesture sparked renewed interest in the philosophical foundations of peace and justice. University courses began incorporating Obama's decision as a case study in moral leadership, asking students to grapple with questions about accountability, hindsight, and the responsibilities that come with recognition and power. The global peace movement saw the moment as an opportunity to advocate for more comprehensive approaches to conflict resolution. Organizations worldwide used Obama's example to call for greater emphasis on diplomatic solutions and civilian protection in international Relations. Months after the initial announcement, the long-term implications of Obama's decision continued to unfold. The returned Nobel Prize sat in a special display at the Nobel Museum in Oslo, accompanied by Obama's statement and historical context about this unique moment in the award's history. Visitors from around the world came to see this symbol of moral complexity and leadership accountability. Obama himself had largely retreated from public view, focusing on writing and reflection. Sources close to him suggested he felt a sense of peace about the decision, despite the ongoing global debate it had generated. His presidential library announced plans for a special exhibition examining the moral challenges of modern leadership, using his Nobel Prize decision as a central case study. The political ramifications continued to reverberate through American politics. Some viewed Obama's action as setting a new standard for presidential accountability, while others saw it as an unnecessary admission that might complicate future military decision-making. The debate reflected deeper questions about how democratic societies should evaluate their leaders' complex legacies. International law scholars noted that while Obama's gesture was symbolic rather than legally binding, it had sparked important conversations about accountability mechanisms for world leaders. Some proposed new frameworks for ongoing evaluation of Peace Prize recipients, though the Nobel Committee remained cautious about implementing such changes. Perhaps most significantly, Obama's decision had inspired other leaders to engage in more transparent discussions about the moral complexities of their own decisions. While no other Nobel laureates followed his example, the global conversation about leadership accountability had been permanently changed by his unprecedented action. The story concluded not with resolution, but with ongoing reflection about the nature of moral leadership in an imperfect world, leaving future generations to determine the ultimate meaning of this extraordinary moment in history.